He was a man so cunning and deceitful that his terrible actions remained under the radar for almost 2 years. And from 2016 through to 2018, he preyed on several women around the desolate and ghostly town of Mitsero, using an online alter ego to tempt and lure them in. As a trusted and respected captain of the army, many would have doubted his crimes. And with thanks to law enforcement turning a blind eye, his reign of terror wouldn't be short-lived either. However, all it would take to tear this case wide open was a freak incident from Mother Nature and the curious minds of a biker gang. And once more clues were found, this story spread throughout the country of Cyprus like wildfire. But who precisely is Nikos Metaxas? How did he prey on multiple women for so long, and why? Welcome back to Coffeehouse Crime, folks. My name is Adrian, and I'm glad to see that you've stepped into my little corner of the world. On this channel, I like to discuss compelling true crime stories and strange cases, so if that sounds like your kind of thing, please consider subscribing to the channel. Today's video is a story that's not really been covered here on YouTube yet, and I'm very excited to share it with you. It's called the case of the Mitsero murders. Now, these murders happened between the years 2016 and 2018 and happened on a small Mediterranean island named Cyprus. But what makes this case so unique is that they were all conducted by the hands of an ex-military officer now turned serial killer. In fact, this guy is the only recorded Cypriot serial killer to date and holds the toughest and longest sentence ever given on the island. However, before we begin our story today, I wanted to thank Scentbird for sponsoring today's video. When it comes to individuality, we all like to have our own personal signature, an impression that others will remember us by. For some, that may be the clothes we put on or the haircut we choose, but one fantastic way to stand out and leave a lasting impression is through the fragrance we choose. This is where Scentbird steps in. Scentbird is a place to begin or deepen your relationship with fragrances, discover your style, and build your collection. Choose new designer perfumes and colognes to try for just $17. With each fragrance, you'll get a 30-day supply. This lets you try fragrances worth up to $500 at a fraction of the cost without any big commitment. Take their online quiz and, based on your answers, Scentbird will pair you with a fragrance you'll love. They carry many luxury brands like Prada, Gucci and Versace, amongst other niche brands like Skylar and Heretic. Personally speaking, Scentbird has helped me identify my all-time favourite scent. Parfums de Marly Leighton smells absolutely incredible, and despite a bottle costing $350, I can now own it at a comfortable price of $17. And if you're looking for another great scent, then check out Eros by Versace. It has an intensely clean yet masculine smell, which is perfect for almost any occasion. If you use my coupon code COFFEECRIME55, you'll get a massive 55% off your first month at Scentbird, which by the way is just over $7. Scentbird is available in the USA and Canada. Thank you to Scentbird for keeping me fresh, and thank you to you guys for supporting us content creators. And now with that said, let's begin today's video. And so, grab yourself a coffee, pull up a seat, and get ready for the deep dive. This is the case of the Mitsero murders. Welcome to yet another new location on the Coffeehouse crime map. Today we're travelling to the southeastern corner of the European Union, to an island country named Cyprus. So, where do I begin? Cyprus is an extremely unique country to say the least. Although it's geographically located in Western Asia, its cultural and geopolitical ties are overwhelmingly European. Signs of human activity date back as far as 10,000 BC, making this island almost as historically rich as it gets. In fact, Cyprus has been home to many empires in the past, including the Romans, the Ottomans, and even the British. And something I find deeply fascinating about this country is the United Nations buffer zone. A no-man's zone that was made during the Greek coup and Turkish invasion of 1974. This story is overwhelmingly complex, but in short, the Greek military junta carried out a coup in Cyprus to unite the island with Greece. And in response to this, just 5 days later, the Turkish army invaded the island under the Treaty of Guarantee Order. Fierce fighting ensued, with a ceasefire coming 3 days later under international pressure. The rest of the story gets very political, but since the country was gridlocked, it was ultimately split into two halves, with the UN buffer zone wedged between both sides. Army presence is very heavy on both sides of the border, with Turkish forces in the north and Cyprus forces in the south. Now, you can walk through the zone at multiple checkpoints, but access inside this zone is strictly forbidden. And to this very day, the barren strip of land is a scar that reminds all of the country's very difficult past. Nicosia Airport, which is found inside the buffer zone, remains deserted ever since the first day of the Turkish invasion. And even to this day, and quite visible on Google Maps, abandoned aircraft and suitcases remain on the runway. Anyway, I'd love to cover the story of Nicosia Airport in great detail one day, and perhaps even visit it. So my question for you is, would that be something you'd like to see me cover eventually? That includes visiting and reporting on cases from the very locations they happened. Let me know what you think in the comments section down below. Today's case pulls us to the Cypriot and southern half of the island, to a small village named Mitsero. It's found in the rockier region of the country and southwest of its capital, Nicosia. Now, from a modernist's point of view, there is almost nothing to talk about here, and with a meagre population of 713 residents, it's quite enough to drive any urban soul into an unbridled frustration. Take a look around Google Street View and you'll know exactly what I mean. Crumbling buildings, road closures, and not another soul in sight. You have one supermarket, one gas station, one church, one school, and that's it. To some, I'm sure the Mitsero seems peaceful, but personally speaking, I would genuinely go insane. Saying that, Mitsero does have some redeeming qualities, and you're going to have to bear with me here while I tell you some of the following information, because it may seem long-winded, but I promise that it's actually important to our case today. Wind the clocks back around 6,000 years, and Mitsero was a booming mining town. During the Roman era, the ore extracted from Mitsero could satisfy nearly all of the empire's copper requirements. Gold and other minerals were found here too, and the town was incredibly successful back in the day. In fact, when it came to historical development, the town was the country's lifeline. But all good things must eventually come to an end, and in recent decades, it has sadly slipped into nothingness. The copper mines have been abandoned for centuries, and despite a short period of time where fool's gold had been mined around the surrounding area, Mitsero has become a quiet and lonely husk of a town, surrounded by nothing but ghostly mine shafts and quarries. This includes Kokino Limni, which is also known as Blood Lake, which bears a dark red colour thanks to the minerals and toxic chemicals found in the dirt. Nowadays, the lonely lands are part of an extended UNESCO geopark. But all credentials aside, the sheer silence and ghostly facade here can feel very overwhelming. Okay, so that may have been a longer introduction to our case than usual. But to be honest with you, there is simply so much to be fascinated about when it comes to a country like Cyprus. And even a town like Mitsero has its own interesting secrets. Now, as you can likely imagine, the weather here gets suffocatingly hot, with temperatures often reaching highs of 45 degrees Celsius, or for you Americans 110 Fahrenheit. This means that you seldom see rainfall here, and especially during the spring and summertime, it's very unlikely to see more than an inch of rainfall. Which is probably why, back in April 2019, the locals of Mitsero were very confused when some rather unusual rainfall brought flooding to the area. Those up high were unaffected, and most of the town remained relatively unscathed, but all of those down below, including the mine shafts and quarries, filled with water, bringing all sorts of debris up to the surface. And this is where the town received its next big surprise, because among all that debris was a body. As you can see, for a place that rarely receives more than an inch of water a month, this was something very different. And once the rain had stopped and the waters eventually receded, there was plenty of mess for the locals to clear up. Now, fortunately, the rain did nothing to stop the usual number of tourists from visiting the area. With its mines and quarries and desolate yet accessible atmosphere, Mitsero sees a very healthy number of visitors in the spring and summer months. By the 14th of April 2019, the rains had finally subsided and the area around Mitsero had finally dried up. It was during this time that 3 local bikers made their way to one of the abandoned mine shafts in the area. They wanted to check the place out, as they realised one of their favourite movies had been filmed here. They made their way up the scaffolding, and standing above the flooded mine shaft, they looked down to see the area obscured by several objects. After throwing a rock down the hole, a thick layer of dirt was unearthed, and looking past the dust, a black plastic bag was revealed. The group were not entirely sure what they were looking at here, and one of them even joked, "We found a body." Well, it seems that morbid curiosity got the better of them, because after climbing down the rotting ladder, the men used a stick to move the bag and take a better look. And you can probably guess where this is going, because that was when they saw 2 human feet hanging out of the bag. They were tied together and significantly decomposed. After screaming out of shock, they called the authorities immediately. At first, investigators had no idea whom they were dealing with. It was assumed that the body belonged to a female, was likely middle-aged, had dark hair and a slim build. But the very next day, emerging evidence and reports would help identify this body, and sadly, it belonged to Mary Rose Tubercio. She was a Filipino woman who was working as a housekeeper in the local area. Her roommate had reported her missing 11 months prior in May 2018. And to make things worse, her 6-year-old daughter had also been reported as missing alongside her. The child's name was Sierra Grace Sukaliuk, and at the age of 6, she would have no way to look after herself without her mother. It turns out that her father, who was also Mary's ex-partner, still lived in the nearby area, and he too was concerned for the lives of his ex-girlfriend and daughter. However, before he could even process his grief and devastation, he was arrested by officers under suspicion of murder. Spoiler alert, but they had the wrong guy. While investigators tried to get to the bottom of Mary's death, rescue parties began to take a look around the other mines and quarries for Sierra. But on the 5th full day of their investigations, all hope was suddenly lost when a rather gruesome confession came in. After tracking and reviewing Mary's online messages, detectives became very suspicious over 2 army officers working for the National Guard. Apparently, these messages were enough for the authorities to bring both of them in for questioning. Very likely because they were the last messages sent before she suddenly disappeared. Now, one of these men turned out to be a false alarm. However, the same couldn't be said for the other one, because the very next day, he confessed to her murder. And that wasn't even the surprising part, because just a few minutes later, he confessed to 6 more murders, making him a serial killer with a body count of 7. Investigators were quite literally gobsmacked to hear this. Crime rates are extremely low in Cyprus, and in fact, if this man really was telling the truth, then he would be the country's first ever recorded serial killer. The man's name is Nikos Metaxas, who at the time was 35 years old. Assigned to the National Guard, Nikos was actually an army captain, meaning he had a lot of authority and respect. Not much is known about his childhood, but he was born in the year 1984, is a Greek man and has Bulgarian ties. And although he did initially have both of his parents in his life, his Bulgarian mother abandoned him at a very young age. After fleeing back to Stara Zagora, she eventually divorced his father, leaving Nikos with a single parent. It is reported that Nikos suffered severe trauma through this abandonment, but he maintained a good relationship with his father and his side of the family. Never really properly addressing his turbulent history, Nikos graduated from Evelpidon Military School before throwing himself into the military, where he took pride in being an armoured guard for the nation. Following the military's mental health program, nothing suggested that he was mentally unfit or unwell, but colleagues did describe him as somewhat of a narcissist with self-inflated confidence. Nikos became a husband and eventually a father to 2 children, who were aged 6 and 7 years old at the time of his arrest. But unfortunately, for reasons unknown, the marriage failed, leaving Nikos entirely alone. Now, his family didn't live too far away, as after all, this is the island nation of Cyprus. But the 1-hour journey was enough to keep Nikos and his children relatively distant. A military officer on the weekdays, Nikos was also known to indulge in photography on the weekends. He would often go into the countryside to take many pictures of Cyprus's rugged terrain. Friends and neighbours claim that he was sensitive, quiet, and fairly artistic. If only they knew about the rest of him, though. With no wife, Nikos put himself back on the dating scene, but he wouldn't do this publicly. Using the online pseudonym of Orestis, which is Greek for the conqueror of mountains, he created several fake social media accounts and eventually fake dating profiles. This name was also used for his Badoo profile, which is a dating app commonly used on the island, and this is where he found and then lured in several of his victims. After speaking to Mary for a few months, it eventually resulted in a casual hookup arrangement, and all of the messages left behind is how the police managed to track him down. Mary had received dozens of messages from him on May the 4th, 2018, which was actually the last day she'd made contact with anyone. In these messages, she'd arranged to meet up with him that evening, before, of course, going radio silent to the rest of the world. And this clue left behind was a glaring red flag for investigators. After contacting Badoo, the dating site confirmed that the Orestis account had been deleted a few months prior. However, they were able to track the IP address and gave that to the authorities. Using this IP address, officers learned that a Facebook account with the same name had actually been deleted the same day Mary's body had been discovered. And of course, after running diagnostics and checking with internet providers, the same name and IP address was traced back to a man named Mr. Nikos Metaxas. Unique side note here, but as the police swooped in to arrest him, Nikos actually pulled a SIM card out of his phone and tried to swallow it. Now, unless he had very good reason for suddenly developing some sort of insatiable urge for plastic, this was very suspicious to officers. Yet thankfully, SIM card or not, servers and digital data exist, and officers already had all they needed. As already mentioned, he was very quick to come clean to officers, and although he did exhibit some sort of degree of guilt to his actions, his confessions were described as dry and without any remorse. After several days behind bars, Nikos decided to finally come clean with his actions by writing a 10-page manifesto about his victims, how he killed them, and where they could find them. However, by now, another body had been discovered. It was found by search crews who were currently down the same mine where Mary's body had been found. They were looking for any clue or sign of her daughter, Sierra, but instead, they discovered the body of a woman called Arian Palanas, and she too was naked and badly decomposed. Arian was a 28-year-old Filipino woman living on the island, and she too had travelled to Cyprus to obtain work as a housekeeper. But after her employers headed out to the mountains for a holiday, Arian decided to look for part-time work while they were away. However, when they returned home in early August, she was nowhere to be found. They therefore reported her disappearance to the authorities, citing the 21st of July 2018 as the last time she had been seen. Arian was carefree and adventurous. She moved to Cyprus to begin a better life, filled with new experiences that could be made through a better work-life balance. And although she'd managed to obtain that for a while, it tragically wouldn't be for that long. Autopsy reports concluded that, much like his first victim, Arian had been strangled to death. This was after consensual sex, as apparently claimed by Nikos. There seemed to be a pattern emerging here. As already declared in his 10-page manifesto, Nikos seemed to target young Filipino women, and he appeared to have his own modus operandi too, and that was to lure a woman through Badoo, have sex with her, and then murder her through strangulation. It was on April the 25th, which was the same day Nikos created his 10-page manifesto, that investigators came across yet another harrowing scene. Located about 8 miles northeast of Mitsero, a third body was discovered in the Orounda shooting range. The body belonged to an unidentified woman who had migrated from Nepal to Cyprus for work. She had been haphazardly thrown into a pit in a remote part of the ranges, and she too had been murdered during the summer of 2018. Sadly, almost nothing is known about her, and while some places name her as Asmita Kahaanu, official Cypriot sources report her as unknown. Following the discovery of 3 bodies, public outcry was both strong and emotional. As mentioned earlier, Cyprus had never witnessed a serial killer before, and with bodies now appearing across the region, people could only speculate how many more would turn up. Due to the country's history, values, and military presence, violence and homicide are comparatively low when compared to other countries. Many were absolutely horrified to see these events unfolding in the news, and the gruesome acts of this self-confessed serial killer continued to send many shockwaves throughout the island nation. But unfortunately, this was just the very beginning, and Nikos Metaxas had yet to reveal the darkest of his secrets. Do you remember Kokino Limni, our ominous-looking blood lake? Well, unfortunately, it was privy to this dark and terrible secret of his. And several days after his arrest, Nikos requested officers to take him there, as he had something very awful to show them. Pointing towards the northeastern portion of the lake, Nikos confessed that, if they were to go looking, they'd find the bodies of 2 more women and a child. Investigators got to work right away, and with the help of sonar equipment provided by the United States, divers took to the water in search of the victims. The cameras used were capable of producing high-definition images at depths of up to 300 meters, which thankfully was enough to explore the 75-meter quarry. Sure enough, 2 bodies were found relatively quickly. Nikos had placed them in suitcases and dumped them in the lake, attaching a cement block to keep the suitcase underwater. The first body belonged to 36-year-old Romanian national Livia Florentina Bunea. She was a housekeeper living in Cyprus, and alongside her was the body of her 8-year-old daughter, Eleanor Natalia Bunea. Both had been reported as missing to the police back in September 2016, meaning they had remained in their underwater graves for 31 months or 2.5 years. And as expected, given this time frame, the bodies were in terrible condition. Born in the year 1980 in Buzău, Romania, Livia had aspirations of finding stable work on the island. She moved over with her daughter to seek a happier way of life, and meeting Nikos through Buzău in September 2016, she was confirmed to be his first ever victim. After strangling Livia during sex, her daughter Eleanor walked in to see Nikos over her mother's body, and tragically, out of concern of Eleanor identifying him through any future police lineup, he made the awful decision to kill her too. They were both thrown into the lake the next night. As a horrifying side note, but in June 2017, a tourist visiting the island had stopped by Blood Lake to take a few pictures and a video. On her own YouTube channel, which has since been deleted, she described the lake as a very mysterious and strange place, and that it also smells really bad, like something had died. She had even noticed multiple suitcases and tires in the lake, though at the time she never thought it could be a dead body. Moving back to 2019, but 2 days later, divers found another victim in the lake. The body belonged to Maricar Valtez Arquiola, and she was another domestic worker from the Philippines. She had left her family back at home to find better pay in Cyprus, and this included her 2-year-old son, who was now being financially supported by his mother. She had aspirations to send her son to a good school in the area, and that is precisely why she decided to work abroad. Maricar disappeared in spring 2017, and while her family were relieved to finally bring closure to her disappearance, it came with the devastating knowledge that she was now dead and gone forever. For 2 years, they had long hoped that she would return. However, return she would not. With 3 more bodies found, the country of Cyprus was absolutely seething, and although Blood Lake bore the largest part of his dark and heinous crimes, there was still more to come. So, the discovery of Mary was ultimately what kicked off this long series of gruesome discoveries. But what officers still hadn't found was her daughter, Sierra. Up until this point in time, he hadn't actually given anyone a location, and everyone believed she would be found in the same location her mother was in. But almost 2 months after being arrested, Nikos finally told them where she could be found. It was a lake called Lake Memi, which was just west of Mitsero. It's around 8 miles west of Kokino Limni, and much like all other sites, it was remote and without any prying eyes. On the 12th of June 2019, Nikos was granted one more visit away from his prison cell to help determine the location of Sierra's body, and after pointing towards its northeastern section, dive teams scoured below the water. After spending 13 months under, Sierra's lifeless body was found 6 meters below the surface. She was wrapped in a sheet and bound with cement blocks. After 59 days of relentless searching, all of Nikos' 7 confirmed victims had finally been found, thus putting an end to the gruesome discovery process. And now, the country of Cyprus could finally begin their grieving. In a statement to the press, President Anastasiades said that he was shocked by the revelation of so many shameful murders against foreign women and children. But many protesters weren't happy, and they accused the authorities of being lazy, negligent, and incompetent towards migrant workers. And to be honest with you, I can't disagree with them here. In a place so rural, you'd think that after 2 or 3 disappearances of a nature and demographic so similar, the police would notice an emerging pattern. And it's hardly a bustling town, right? Not somewhere that crimes could just so easily be buried. But many argued that this was actually allowed to happen by a country and society that actively encouraged xenophobic behaviour. One thing that can't be denied is if investigators looked into these disappearances sooner, then Nikos would have been stopped before claiming even more of his victims. And in the wake of all this discourse, the police chief of the country was ultimately sacked, and the justice minister resigned as well. Moving in towards his trial, Nikos was faced with 7 counts of first-degree murder, but before he could even face the judge, he would have to wait a while. alongside over 700 personal statements. Evidence from 5 crime scenes, 7 bodies, 9 properties, and 453 items would have to be reviewed. There were also several reports that authorities would have to sift through, as Nikos had changed his story multiple times before his trial. At first, he planned to fight against his charges. He told officers that he'd strangled 2 of his victims because he suspected they were planning to pimp out their daughters. He had murdered these women out of punishment, and then, quote, freed the children by mercy killing them. He further claimed that he'd killed Maricar while they were having sex because she reminded him of Livia, and further down the line, this was the same excuse given for murdering Asmita. But after realizing that pigs can't fly, he decided to give up on this fake tale. In preparation to writing his 10-page confession, he told interrogators, "I am bored, I want to go to prison. Bring me some paper so I can write it all." But time seemed to eventually get the better of him. Perhaps he needed an external reaction to help him realize how serious his actions were. But after becoming aware of the pain, anger, and sadness made by his own 2 hands, Nikos's tough guy exterior melted away like butter in the sun. He confessed, "I have committed these terrible crimes, and I take full responsibility. And as much as I would like to turn back the time, I cannot. I apologize to the victims and their families. I apologize to the children, and I apologize to the Cypriot public, all who are wondering how a bad person could have reached this point. The same question troubles me, but I haven't found an answer yet. I have memories that I've been trying for decades to forget." What Nikos was referring to here was his childhood trauma. He would also try to blame his foul actions on the Greek genocide of 1922, which happened during and after World War I. Psychologists determined that Nikos was suffering from a severe antisocial personality disorder, which, more or less, meant that he took absolutely zero accountability for his actions and behaviour. To add to this, they further concluded that he was extremely narcissistic and unremorseful as a man. The prosecution clarified that Nikos's claims regarding the pimping out of the children, Elena and Sierra, were false. And with the exception of Asmita, whose cause of death was a severe head injury, the remaining 6 of his victims were killed by strangulation. As a result, on June 24, 2019, he was sentenced to 7 prison terms of 25 years. Which means that Nikos, a man who once served his country, now holds the toughest sentence ever handed out in Cypriot history. The man seems to have accepted his fate, and not only has he claimed that he will never appeal his case, but he has even volunteered to be a human test subject multiple times. The general public was satisfied to hear the verdict, and as the extent and knowledge of his killing spree came to light, the realization that a dark and twisted serial killer had been in their midst all this time elicited fear and dismay. It also created much sympathy for the victims, who had sadly been disregarded and ignored by most. Cypriot President Anastasiadis condemned the police for their sheer negligence and inefficiency of the missing persons cases. However, he did not stop short of protesters' claims by adding his belief that their actions were not guided by any racist motives. Sadly, it has taken such a tragedy for the country to collectively identify vulnerable migrants. However, there has been a clear shift in how the media and society now view migrant domestic workers. Doros Polikarpou, who heads the refugee and migrant support group KISA, said, "There is no question that these people work in conditions of extreme exploitation. They do not enjoy the same rights as Cypriots, and we must change this." There does seem to be fresh movement too. Cypriot Parliament are now reviewing why and how 37 migrant women have been killed in the last 23 years. But unfortunately, it is all too late for the victims of this story. Livia Bunea, Elena Bunea, Maricar Valtez Arquiola, Mary Rose Tubercio, Sierra Sukaliuk, Arian Palanas Lazano, and Asmita Kardkarbista. All of these women wanted a better life for themselves and their families. Far away from home and all the people they knew, they worked in a country with a complicated language not of their own. They had no one around them and were desperately vulnerable. And through popular dating apps, and under the name of Orestis, Nikos Metaxas used their vulnerabilities to his advantage. I can't say that anyone will miss him behind bars. Not only has he disgraced the nation, but his wife and his children have disowned him as well. This video yet again demonstrates the vulnerabilities of migrant workers, and unfortunately how much we have yet to go to be able to protect these people. Now don't get me wrong, it is nice to see this sort of awareness coming to the forefront, but as you can likely guess what I'm about to say, These sorts of stories shouldn't happen in the first place. These women were all acting out of selflessness to support and provide for their families. And it's a real shame that, during this action, they were picked on by killers for their own gain. Anyway folks, I think I'm going to wrap this one up here today. Thank you so much for watching another video today by Coffeehouse Crime. If you found this case interesting or insightful, please remember to like the video and subscribe if you haven't yet. So what do you think about this story, and what do you think about Nikos' sentencing? Please let me know in the comments section down below. Another quick thank you to Scentbird for sponsoring today's video, and if you'd like to use my code, please take a look in my link down below. Anyway folks, that just about does it today. So again, thank you so much for watching, and as always, I'll be back again very soon for another video. But until we meet again, please remember to look after yourself, look after each other, and of course, stay safe. Thank you, and goodbye.